Hey everyone, it's time again to recap the latest news from the solar industry compiled by the American Solar Energy Society. I'm Jay Warmke with SolarPVTraining.com, and this is what's happening in the wonderful world of solar for the week of March 9th. Now, the U.S. Energy Administration, or the EIA, recently released their electric generation data from 2024, presenting a full picture of electrical generation for last year. Solar and wind grew nationwide at the same time that coal continued its long-term decline. Natural gas had small increases and remains the country's top fuel for producing electricity. Natural gas power plants generated 43.3% of the country's electricity last year, up from 43.2% in 2023. Utility-scale renewables, which include wind, solar, and hydropower, were 22.7%, up from 21.4%. Nuclear was 18.2%, down from 18.5%, and coal accounted for 15.2% of electric generation, down from 16.1%. EIA projects this trend will continue in 2025 as wind and solar dominate new generation sources. EIA projects that solar plus storage will account for 81% of all new electrical generation this year. Wind will provide 12%, with natural gas accounting for about 7% of new generation. Nuclear and coal are not slated to add any additional capacity in 2025. Electric generators report that they plan to retire 8.1 gigawatts of coal-fired generating capacity this year, or 4.7% of the total U.S. coal fleet. This is double the amount of coal-fired generation retired last year. And Texas widened its lead as the country's renewable energy leader last year. Texas's dominance in renewable energy started with the growth of wind farms in the late 2000s and early 2010s. But in recent years, Texas has become a leader in utility-scale solar, trailing and then surpassing California in generation from this resource. Last year, Texas generated 83% more renewable energy than runner-up California. Iowa ranks a distant third, thanks almost entirely to wind power. Now, despite a lot of talk about a bright future in powering data centers, nuclear power is essentially unchanged in 2024. In April of last year, the Vogtle 4 nuclear reactor came online in Georgia. It was only the third nuclear reactor to come online since 1980. Construction of the Vogtle units 3 and 4 began in 2009. Initially, it was projected to cost about $14 billion and take about 8 years to construct. It actually cost about double that, coming in at over $30 billion and taking almost twice as long, with 15 years to complete. Meanwhile, 8 nuclear reactors have been retired over the last 7 years, and another one, the Diablo Canyon reactor in California, is set to retire this year. Currently, according to EIA, there are no nuclear power plants under construction in the U.S. at this time. The transition to cleaner vehicles continues in Europe, where 49% of new city buses across EU countries in 2024 were zero-emission models instead of fossil fuel-burning vehicles. This according to a new analysis from the European Federation for Transport and the Environment. The transition to electric mass transit beat the previous year's number, in which 36% of new buses purchased in 2023 were battery electric. For 2024, battery electric buses came in at 46% of those that were purchased, while fuel cell vehicles made up about 3% of the zero-emission buses. The analysis determined that new European regulations established last year, as well as more local policies at the city level, have helped in this transition. The EU's Clean Vehicle Directive mandates that at least 32% of all heavy-duty trucks and buses purchased from 2026 through 2030 be zero emissions. The legislation also requires that all bus sales be more than 90% zero emission vehicles by 2030 and 100% by 2035. T&E estimates that the rate of clean vehicle adoption for city buses will reach 100% zero emissions in most of the EU by 2027, which is about 8 years ahead of the legislative schedule. The Hanford Nuclear Reservation, described as the nation's most contaminated nuclear site, is perhaps going solar. During the Cold War, this site expanded to include 9 reactors and 5 large plutonium processing complexes, which produced plutonium for more than the 60,000 weapons built for the U.S. nuclear arsenal. The site shut down in 1989, and that year the Washington Department of Ecology and the United States Environmental Protection Agency, as well as the Department of Energy, formed a tri-party agreement and began to engage in what has since become the world's largest environmental cleanup. In 2014, it was estimated that the cost of completing this cleanup at the Hartford site will exceed $113 billion. 10,300 acres on this site that the government has determined have been sufficiently cleaned up for redevelopment have been purchased or repurposed for by solar developer Hecate. Sorry about that. The project is expected to be completed by 2030 at an estimated cost of around $4 billion. It will generate about 2,000 megawatts of electricity, which is enough to power the cities of Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver. This will make it the largest solar array currently in the country, far exceeding the currently largest array, which is Copper Mountain Solar Facility in Nevada, which has a generating capacity of about 802 megawatts. And the amount of land needed for renewable energy projects is often criticized, but a new study points out that countries like the UK and the United States use much more land for golf courses than they do for renewable energy projects. According to the recent study published by the Environmental Research Communications Group, in 2024, there were about 38,400 golf courses worldwide, 80% of them located in just 10 countries. The United States, with over 16,000 courses, was far and away number 1, followed by the UK and then followed by Japan. Now, based on the land required by wind and solar farms per kilowatt of generation, the study found that golf courses consume about 4 times as much land as renewable energy projects. The study also pointed out that golf courses have an outsized environmental impact as compared with other uses because they usually require quite a lot of chemicals to treat the grasses as well as a great deal of water. And that's the news from the solar industry for this week. We'll see you next week.